Sorry.
No. Lesson 15. Svadhistana Chakra. Sva means self. Self with a capital S. Svadhisthana Chakra is the seat of the self. We grow up exposed to the outside world, which shapes our idea of who we are, which is determined by culture, upbringing, education, and of course very big influence is the media. But when harmony, sattva, occurs in Svadhisthana Chakra, besides the self, the idea of self that you have based on impressions since you were born, you start to manifest naturally aspects, characteristics of the self that you were not aware of before. We kind of touched upon this when we discussed self-study. Self-study, I mentioned at the time, is not something that you do by sitting at the desk and saying, now I'm going to study myself. But it is something that happens naturally as a result of increasing consciousness, widening, awakening, and then further widening consciousness. Now here you see specifically the location where that is actually taking place. So any yoga practitioner will naturally manifest their true characteristics. It is the reason why all yoga practitioners do, from the very beginning, change. That is a change that feels good, but in the eyes of family, friends who have known you all their lives, something happens that sometimes is regarded as positive and good, but it also sometimes leads to kind of shock. Like, you've always been like this, why do you suddenly change? Why do you suddenly think about things differently? Why do you have to be so rebellious? That is simply because you start manifesting aspects of yourself that did not manifest before. In the end, it's a good thing because it will eventually lead to you determining your own destiny, finding your own way in life, regardless of how you have been taught, educated, brought up, etc. Regardless of culture, identification with family, etc. Some of you will recognize this already, as it has started to happen. Some of you have been involved in yoga long before you joined this course. I definitely recognize this, as yoga has totally changed my life. It in fact saved me from certain self-destruction. So here you have the explanation why. It will lead you to find your own way regardless of the cards that have been dealt throughout life. You will start taking things into your own hands, based on not what other people tell you, but on what you feel, what you think, based on your own interpretation of yourself and the world around you. Good. The subtle element of the chakra is water, tamatra, that is the gross matter in which it manifests. We talked about water before, as we talked about the ideal circumstances to practice asana. One of the requirements is that you stay one arrow shot away from water, another is one arrow shot away from earth, and another one arrow shot away from fire. Many yoga teachers explain this literally. Ajita also has explained this literally. It's good to practice in nature. It's good to practice on the beach, but don't come too close to the shoreline. There may be some truth in it. Water has a huge attraction. Force of gravity of water is very strong. As you know, the difference between high and low tide, billions of tons of water are being moved, in fact, by the force of gravity of the moon. With the waxing and waning of the moon also, this force changes. Human beings are very sensitive to this force of gravity from the moon, but we are usually not conscious of it. So, well, statistically, most suicides take place during the full moon, and statistically also most women, when not on birth control, have their monthly period around full moon. And the Svadhistana chakra being the center of emotions and desires, the full moon also has a big influence on our emotional well-being. Hence, the word lunatic, you were hit by the moon. Lunatic is in fact a Latin word, luna being moon, and tic is being hit. And it's a word that we use when people show signs of insanity, temporary insanity, emotional instability, becoming very emotional, crying, but also in more extreme forms. Well, in the worst case scenario, it does lead to suicide or forms of violence. So the influence, although we are often not conscious of it, at least consciously aware, the influence is considerable. So subtle element is water. The subtle vehicle of action, the karmendriya, is reproduction. When there is disharmony in the chakra, we end up, or we could end up, being infertile. Infertility, both men and women, is quite a problem these days. Many people, once they decide they want to have a child, they seem not to be able to get pregnant. Interestingly, when we want something, there is a field of tension that prevents us from getting it. Have you ever noticed this? And when you get it, it leads to a lot of trouble. That's when we talked about desire, non-coveting, the fourth of the yamas. We talked about this issue, the tension that occurs when wanting instead of wishing or hoping. That is a negative tension. We have the luxury, of course, of birth planning, so we can focus on career, we can focus on building a relationship with our partner a couple of years before we actually start with a family. But the reality is that in the past, before birth control, pregnancy just happened. It was just a natural consequence of of having sex with each other. So now we control that and we say, now it's time to have a baby. So now I want a baby. And it is the one thing that causes a blockage in the energy circulation in Svadhistana Chakra, based on which the body says, you are not in a good condition now. I've done prenatal classes in the past, women who were already pregnant, but I've also done classes with women who wanted to become pregnant. And amazingly, within 6 months, all of them would, at some point, become pregnant. And my advice always was, knowing this, don't think about getting pregnant. When you have intercourse with your partner, have intercourse because you want to, because you enjoy it, not because there is this goal of getting pregnant, because that creates that field of tension that the body translates as a form of stress, not allowing you to get pregnant. So just relax, just enjoy. Before you know it, you get pregnant, and it works. The subtle organ of perception, Jnanendriya, is taste. Taste in the mouth. We will come back to that later when we have a very special pranayama exercise that works with the taste. The subtle energy of this chakra, remember in Muladhara chakra, the subtle energy was apana prana. The subtle energy of the water center is samana prana. The color related to this chakra is orange, and there is also a mantra, Vam, to which we do not usually pay much attention. The chakra has its main developmental stage between the age of 8 and 14. It is indeed the stage where young people, children, start developing a sense of I-ness. If you look at yourself, you look back into the past, you will see that your memory is limited and goes back probably somewhere to the age of 6, 7, 8 years old. There are exceptions. Children who undergo severe change, it doesn't have to be violence or negative, but moving house can cause the memory to be activated even when you're young. But of course, violence, abuse, neglect, these kind of experiences leave impressions in the child's mind, memory, that do later return to the surface. But for the rest, most of us have no recollection from our early childhood years. In the developmental stage of Svadhisthana Chakra, we become consciously aware of ourselves, but not only that, we become consciously aware of ourselves in relation to other people, and in specific in relation to the other sex. We develop a sense of eroticism. Sexuality is a deeply rooted instinct of survival, which prevails in the first 7 years of development. In the next 7 years of development, there is added a sense of eroticism. Romanticism becomes possible during that stage. So that is where children spend time in front of the mirror, studying their appearance, often complaining about small things like nose or ears or freckles, being very super conscious about those things, and even sometimes developing an inferiority complex because of it. The location is also, Svadhistana chakra is also the location of negative emotions, but there are also positive aspects, like saving money. Children around that age, they have a piggy bank and like to put coins in the piggy bank, or they start collecting. They start collecting collecting things. It can be coins, collecting coins, but it can be collecting. When I was a child, the commerce plays into this development, offering collectible items with a product that you buy. When you go to the candy store, they would have a series of 100 sports boys that are crazy about soccer. They start collecting old soccer stars that you with each chewing gum that you buy, you get one card and you exchange them with your friends at school when you have them double and so on. Stamps, children collect stamps even into adulthood. They cherish their collection. But also collecting, there are children who collect things that they find in the street, in the rubbish that we throw away, or collecting old newspapers and bring them to the we used to have a vegetable shop, we have a fish stall in our neighborhood, and in the past they used to pack their products in newspapers. So if you had a little pile of newspapers, you would get 25 cents from the shopkeeper. Those kind of things. Exercises. Last week I didn't mention it yet because we did not have a good oversight yet in the chakras. Still, we do not know all the chakras, but lower chakras are mainly stimulated and harmonized by exercises in which the legs and the hips are involved. Oh. The mosquitoes are the only creatures you are allowed to crush. For the rest, we practice non-violence. Where were we?
So the lower chakras.
Yes.
Exercise.
When you spread the feet, triangle pose, Prasarita Padottanasana with the forward bend. When you spread the feet, simply spreading the legs, spreading the feet, stimulates Muladhara chakra. When you bend at the hips, forward bend, or like the triangle poses where you tilt the hips sideways, you stimulate Svadhistana chakra. If you add a bent leg or both legs bent, like Uttita Parsvakonasana, for example, the extended flank pose, or the two warrior poses where you bend one leg, you then also stimulate Manipura chakra. So Manipura chakra we haven't discussed yet, but spreading the feet, Muladhara chakra, tilting the hips forward or sideways, Svadhisthana chakra, and bending the legs, squatting on one leg, stimulates Manipura chakra. Obviously, when you do exercise with the upper body, you stimulate chakras above the diaphragm. Throat chakra, for example, stimulates, the shoulder stand, stimulates throat chakra, but also because your arms are involved, heart chakra, and because you're upside down, it stimulates Ajna chakra and the crown chakra. People who have this chakra well balanced characteristically show graceful and smooth movements, emotional maturity, flexibility, and ability to accommodate changes. When you understand this, you see that sattva in this chakra is actually quite rare. Most people are afraid of change. It is why we basically stay stuck in situations where intuitively we don't want to be, but out of fear, which is Muladhara chakra, of change, which is Svadhistana chakra, we just keep going. We keep going in the same kind of job, day by day. We keep staying in a relationship that has died long ago. We have a tendency to stay in the same kind of patterns for decades, basically all our lives, as a result of this. Interestingly, when more and more sattva occurs in this chakra, not only does your true characteristics more and more manifest, your self with a capital S, but also you're not afraid of change anymore. And this leads eventually to a very dynamic path that every yoga practitioner will be on. Fear is still a big part of life because it's simply our most primordial instinct of survival. But the yogi has this awkward way of being able to deal with fear. Not only that, challenge their fears. And when you look at it that way, you cannot but come to the conclusion that yoga is in fact a paradox in itself. It's a science of paradoxes. You would think that the yogi, being harmonious, sattvic, possessing peace of mind, will then start leading a very stable, boring life. Because you are in total peace with yourself. The reality is, this is what everybody who is disharmonious tries to do. And hence we get stuck in our comfort bubble, in our comfort zone. The yogi, having the power of stability, then uses that as a basis to be able to deal with change. Constant growth, development, evolution that other people shy away from based on the fear in Muladhara chakra and Svadhisthana chakra, fear of change, inability to accommodate change. The biggest causes of stress, do you know what the biggest causes of stress are? It's both related to change, essential change in our lives. The number one reason for stress is losing a partner. Do you know what number 2 is?
Moving?
Yes, moving house. Moving house is a huge cause of stress. In Korea, everybody moves all the time, except me. My apartment, 84 units. Every spring and autumn, 20% of all people living there move. I've been there for 12 years and I hope I can stay there another 12 years because I hate moving. Why? Because it turns everything upside down, so much disruption. Good. That's another issue. Raja's characteristics is interesting. Easily addicted, very emotional, emotionally dependent and attached. Sound familiar? easily addicted, very emotional, dependent and attached. It's the characteristics of true artists. True artists never get old. Have you noticed? Vincent van Gogh, an ancient artist, Bach, Beethoven, very tragic lives they had. But you have modern artists too. Amy Winehouse. Who doesn't know Amy Winehouse? She died in her early 30s. Very tragic. True artist. Why are they true artists? Because they bristle with energy, vital energy, that translates into creativity and ability to express emotion, passion. But it's all these things that, rightly so or not, are being considered negative in the world that we live in. If you are emotional, your parents or your classmates or your partner will say that you are unstable and you should control your emotions. And because we grow up in a world like that, subconsciously we start suppressing our emotions, and with that we kill our spirit, because spirituality is not possible without bristling with energy, and it kills our creativity. So what real artists need is something like yoga, with which they can learn to control, not oppress. Yoga is the science of control. Yoga is the science of the control of life. But people wrongly equate control with suppression or oppression, while they are actually two totally opposites. Because oppressing means denying, ignoring. Controlling means trying to canalize the energy that is involved. And there are artists who have succeeded in doing that. Like Picasso, for example. Picasso lived into his 90s. And the violinist who wrote a foreword in the Hatha Yoga, in the Yoga Dipika, Yehudi Menuhin, he also lived into his 90s. Magnificent artists, famous artists because of their true art created by inspiration, not to make money, but to express themselves. So we have a dilemma here. As yogis, we now understand that emotion is not a liability, but an asset. And yet, it can cause great harm, suffering. It leads, in many cases of artists, it leads to drug abuse, alcohol abuse. It is their way to manage their passion and their emotions. The Rolling Stones, also a good example. Some of the Rolling Stones, some of the Beatles, world famous pop artists, they were famous for their drug abuse and alcohol abuse. Somehow they found a way to turn away from that and gain some control. Rolling Stones are in their 70s. They're still rocking. They're still performing. I think they should retire and leave it to the young people. But it's amazing how they have found control after many years of serious drug abuse. Tamas characteristics of this chakra is rigidity in body and attitude, difficulty with social skills, fear of change, and lack of passion. Now, I ended the handout with a quote from Carl Jung, a world famous psychologist. And Carl Jung, the quote of Carl Jung says it all. Connecting yoga with modern psychology. What Carl Jung wrote is this: emotion is the chief source of all becoming conscious. There can be no transforming of darkness into light and apathy into movement without emotion. Now, remember, at the beginning of this course, and probably a couple of times, I have mentioned that any serious yoga practitioner goes through a temporary stage in which we are emotionally unstable. This explains it. What happens is your vitality increases as a result of your yoga practice. You become more conscious and sensitive, leading to a connection with the self. You discover good things, but also things you rather would not know about. Now you know at least this is not a bad thing. Yes, it causes suffering, but the answer, the solution, is not to oppress it or ignore it. The answer is to work through it and to try to canalize it towards where we really want to go with our lives. And that naturally leads to change in the long term. Again, Carl Jung. Emotion is the chief source of all becoming conscious. He connects emotion with awakening. Yoga leads to awakening of consciousness. Emotion is energy. And remember, energy without sparkle has a tendency to gravitate towards the bottom. If energy is allowed, if energy is stimulated to be vital, alive, it rises up to where consciousness is located, and that is why the two are inherently linked. So if oppressing emotion literally leads to killing the spirit. Can you follow this? You know what spirit is? Spirit is when you feel happy, when you feel inspired, when you feel passionate, when you feel enthusiastic. That is why we say you are in high spirits. Literally, because it's located here. But there are many things in life, many aspects of life that bring that energy down. That is where we become depressed, or literally down. We feel down, depressed. We feel gray, dark, uninspired, literally. So normal human being has a tendency to gravitate to the bottom and sometimes has a flare-up where we are in higher spirits. You practice yoga regularly, you will be more and more in higher spirits. With that, the paradox here is that at the same time we become unstable. Because energy is inherently unstable. It's the principle of nuclear energy. You understand nuclear energy? To build a nuclear power plant costs billions of dollars. It's very, very complex. Why? Because there is such a huge amount of energy that is inherently unstable. They have to build a very complex, complicated infrastructure to canalize that energy so that it can power millions of homes. If one little thing goes wrong in that whole infrastructure, it turns the other way. It becomes very destructive. You can see yourself as a nuclear power plant. Especially when you practice yoga, you become more and more full of energy. And that energy can feel destructive at times. It is part of the process of becoming a yogi. And you suffer most yogis suffer because they do not know this. If you know it, you will be hit, but then you scratch your head and you say, we discussed this. I know how it works. This is part of the process. Let's see what I can do in a constructive way to deal with this. Questions? Yes,
I mentioned, do you consider like soul and energy like it's just similar together, or soul and energy is totally different?
No, soul is pure energy.
Soul is pure energy.
What is soul? Soul is consciousness. Soul is like a hard drive that contains all your true characteristics, all your DNA, all your true characteristics. It only manifests if there is energy available. We will talk about the crown chakra, of course, but when you look at pictures of the ancient religious pictures of saints, Christ, Buddhas, those people are always pictured with a ball of light around their head, which is symbolism for. It is a symbolical indication that this is a person who has their energy on a higher level. That's you as a yogi. As a yoga practitioner, your energy will be more and more on higher levels. It's all about energy. Without energy, you just merely exist. Walk in the street and you see many people like that. You know the concept of zombies. Zombies are creatures that are brain dead or something. But it's symbolism for all those people that dutifully go to work every day, totally uninspired because that inspiration has been killed by upbringing, by indoctrination, by education. And most people are, in fact, zombies. And you can't blame them because it feels safe, it feels stable, it feels comfortable. And we compensate that condition with consumption. Either literally consumption, eating our favorite cookies and foods, snacks, or consumption of what is fed to us through the media, movies, what have you. Not saying that there is something wrong with that, but there is this situation where you are in fact a robot, and the only way to survive that condition is by feeding yourself with your favorite foods, snacks, or TV series or what have you. Now, if you consume consciously, have your favorite foods and TV series and what have you. But in the meantime, stay alive. Do not use it as an alternative for being alive. But the tragedy is the society that has been created doesn't allow much room for people to be alive. Because the most efficient way to keep the economy going and being profitable is to have as many robots as possible, who dutifully go to work every morning, arrive in time and stay all day to produce, and then leave to go home. I'm pretty certain as a yogi you will come to the point that you would like to reduce your working hours. You will work towards a situation where either you become your own boss, you have your own business, company, or you create a situation in which you can have the luxury of working part-time. Some of you already do, and if not, that is a natural need that you will work towards as a yogi. Why? Because you need more and more room for yourself. You need more and more room to be yourself. You need more and more eye time. Do not quit your job because your job pays your bills. But do not allow your life to kill you again. It's a struggle, it's not easy. That is why real yogis are real warriors. I've said it before, and it's not a joke. It's much easier to just go along with that gray life that society presents us. It's comfortable, it's stable. But I think once you do open up, once you do develop consciousness, you naturally want to liberate yourself from that. And liberation is one of the highest goals of yoga, and this is part of it. And it is a process of decades that starts here. Liberation of the spirit. And everything is energy. That is why yoga has guidelines on food, on dietary habits. Eat pure foods, healthy foods, light foods. Don't eat too much, also don't eat too little. It's all about energy. Being too busy also is not good for your development as a yogi. Because development requires energy. If you spend that by being too busy, there is no room. We will talk about that also when we read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. They have very clear guidelines and very interesting. Other questions? It is clear that the path of yoga can lead to conflict. And a human being has a natural tendency towards subconscious functioning, also as a yogi. You have your moments of clarity, of consciousness, and then without realizing it, you just naturally go back to your old ways of subconscious functioning. And that's where we get stuck. Still happens to me after almost 40 years of yoga. It will happen to you too. For me, it's just a matter of time. I always figure it out. And interestingly, when I'm really stuck, I start talking to myself as if I'm talking to one of my students who comes to me and says, I'm stuck, what should I do? I'm saying the same things to myself as I would to my students. When you get stuck, let me know. It's my responsibility. I opened up the can of worms for you. So when you're not able to deal with the worms, I will give you a kick under your Muladhara Chakra to help you on your way. In just a very practical, direct way. Because it's always just a matter of some insight that you fail to see. When you see it, you say, ah, there's the key. Don't hesitate. Okay, let's have a short break.